Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to Midnight and Dark Stories. The night is deep, the stars are hidden, and it's the perfect time for us to gather here and dive into the mysterious and thrilling world of tales. Prepare to be spellbound as we uncover the secrets that lie in the darkness. Let's begin this enchanting journey together. All of this must have transpired in about maybe 45 seconds from when he first started talking to me. And it was at this point that I texted my partner, who let me know that she was still at the same store that I last saw her at the time. I said to her that I think I may have almost been abducted a bit over the top. I know, especially for a fairly large 20-year-old book like I am. I'm assuming, though, that if I'd gone down there, I was probably going to get robbed. I'm glad, though, that I'll hopefully never know. I went straight to center security, though I did report it. They took some details of where and when it happened but didn't seem overly concerned. But anyway, be careful out there, guys, because you just never know who may cross your path one day. This story took place in Texas back in the fall of 1994. I was traveling from a small town outside of Dallas called Bryan and was heading to my duty station. And I would never take this route again after what happened this night on the I-20. So I was traveling alone and had left at around 7 p.m. on my road trip across Texas. If you've ever been to Texas, then you know that you can drive for hours on end and still be in Texas. And this story would change my life forever. So I decided to stop at a rest stop along the highway to stretch my legs and take a pit. I noticed a woman in a late 70s model Ford parked in the lot. When I got out, I went and did my business, had a smoke, and before I left, I noticed the woman still sitting in her car. So I walked over and knocked on the window, which did startle her, and asked if she was okay or needed help. She smiled and said that her tire was flattened, that her battery had died while she was waiting here. I asked if she had a spare tire, and she said no. I asked if anyone was coming to get her, and she said that her daughter was supposed to. But it's been several hours of just her waiting there. I asked where she was going, and she told me the location. So I offered to give her a ride if she wanted. She actually started crying and said that this would be wonderful. So we start heading to the location, and we're making small talk. I told her that I was in the Air Force and heading to LC. She said that was wonderful, in hopes that I really enjoyed it. I did notice, though, that she kept looking in the mirror, so I asked if she was okay with me giving her a ride. She smiled and said that everything was fine. She was just happy that somebody had stopped. We finally get to her house in a small suburb just outside of town. She thanks me for a ride, hands me a scrap of paper with a whole number on it. Then she asked I call her when I get to my destination so she can know that I made it safely. I thanked her and said that I would. But I'd wait until the morning, since I knew that it was going to be late. When I arrived at Reese AFB late that night and stayed at the on-base hotel. I got checked in and then took a shower, and eventually I just went to bed. The next morning I got up and I got dressed for the day and went to find my unit HQ. I didn't even think about the night before, because I had so much to do, checking squared away and whatnot. And it wouldn't be for another 2 weeks before I came across that scrap of paper with the number. I kind of felt bad that I hadn't kept my promise to call, so I decided to stop what I was doing and just give her a call. I called the number and a young woman answered the phone, so I asked for Sandy. The woman on the line said who, so I apologized and said maybe it was Sandra. She asked who this was, and I gave her my name and explained that I had given her a ride a couple of weeks back. As she said that I must be confused, and I read the number off of the paper in my hand just in case I dialed the wrong number. She said, no, I had the correct number, but I couldn't give her mother a ride home because she had passed away in the early 80s. She was apparently driving home and began having car troubles, so she stopped at a rest stop just outside of town when she didn't make it home. Her father became concerned, and it was at that time that there was a knock on their door, and state troopers and local police officers were at the door. She said that a trooper saw the vehicle, stopped at the race stop and stopped to check it out. What he found and what she told me gave me chills. Her mother had been brutally sexually assaulted, and her head was completely bashed in. Someone had slid her tires and disconnected her battery. And the worst part was that she didn't die right away, as there was bloody handprints on the window, steering wheel and shifter because she was trying to leave. The trooper said that they didn't have any suspects, but there were times that certain motorcycle clubs would pass through at night. I described the car and what her mother looked like and what she was wearing, as best as I could recall. She definitely didn't look old enough to have a daughter my age, but her daughter just started crying and asked that I not call back. Though, I received word to report to the squadron commander, so I headed over to our building. When I arrived, my captain called me into his office and began asking me questions about where I lived and when did I drive and what route I took. I immediately knew that something was wrong, and we then went into a briefing room where my CO and Texas Ranger and a state trooper were seated. I introduced UC myself, and I took a seat. They began by asking the same questions my captain had previously asked and why. I had called the number and spoke with the woman. I explained everything as clearly and in detail as possible. They then finished taking notes and the ranger asked who needed a smoke. So my co excused himself and the captain, the two officers and myself, stepped out back to the smoking area. And this was when the ranger informed me that he was the actual TRU who had found the car back in the early ADS and that the only reason he came out today was because of the details that I mentioned in my phone call to the daughter. The trooper said that they do get calls about a stranded woman every so often, but when they get there they never find anything. So in closing, I guess you need to be careful who you decide to help, because not everyone is what they seem. I'd like to state, too, that the reason specific time frames are not given is due to the personal nature of some of these events, but I can assure you that everything I've told you is true. So this happened years ago, and I was young, but I've asked my grandma about this incident recently. My grandma is a big road rager and likes to cuss and flip off and pull around people all the time. It's gotten better in her years, but this was in 200,414. I think my grandma didn't tell my grandpa and I this story until it actually happened. So before we get into that, though, here's some background about how I knew the mom and the kids. The mom was really sweet and I was in her son's class in elementary and I walked past her all the time on the way to the buses while she was waiting for my classmate. I also had daycare with all three of the kids and I can't say that I met her boyfriend or ever saw him since I was young and I was in my own world playing with friends. But once in a while, just walking past her, she asked if I knew where my classmate was, since he was running late and I stood next to her and played with the youngest while she waited until I almost missed the bus anyway. But back to the incident. So my grandma's a big road rager and on her way back from work, mostly because of rush hour, she was doing a roundabout about the only one in our town and pretty new in a car behind kept honking and riding on our bumper. She got sick of it because she was focused on trying to get around the new roundabout while having someone on her bumper and hog a horn for a few seconds while had to stop and flip the car off. She watches this guy in the mirror as he gets out of the car and cracks his knuckles while speed walking up to her. He's cussing her out, and she recognized the look on his face from past incidents with not a nice man. She was on her own, though, and her car required her to manually lock the doors and trunk and roll up her window. She basically said screw this and sped around the stopped cars in front of her, which was really dangerous because of just how narrow it was, and just got off the roundabout. A month later, though, they're watching the news while I'm in my room and my grandparents start talking. It was a small house and I could hear them at least muttering. My grandpa yells for me, so I get up and I go back to the room. Hey, don't you know little Johnny from school? My grandpa asked and I nodded. feeling confused and wondering if something happened to him. My grandpa plays the news story and he says, "Do you know his mom in the news told the whole story of how the man strangled her to death and posted the pictures on 4chan and the caption that if you don't believe me, watch the Washington News Channel at about so and so hours her son will be home then." It was the oldest son that discovered her nude and dead, and I had a few interactions with him before because of daycare and whatnot. And honestly, my entire heart just hurts thinking about it. My grandma sat up, they showed the boyfriend's face and she realized it. That was the man in the car behind her, and I mean he even looked recognizable to me as well. Probably because it's just a small town and I may have seen him at some stage. But she told us the whole story and even just thinking about it sent shivers up my spine. He could have been slowly breaking just then, and that's why he raged out like he did. I'm just really happy that my grandma got out of that roundabout when she did. I'm not saying that he would have killed her or anything like that, just that he was already a woman, beat her and dangerous. So who's to say that he wouldn't at least hurt her? I did talk to all 3 boys at one point or another the year when I would find their Instagrams. I don't think that I talked to the eldest, though, but I tried to get in contact with just no luck. My classmate really didn't want to talk about it, but I tried my best to console him out of doing stuff. I don't want to put in too much detail about the kids just for respect for them, but the youngest ran a whole account for his mom and would post just about the same picture every time that he was missing her, and I think he even wrote a book about it, although he was only 8 at the time. I have no idea why they're 5 years later, but I don't think they're in tow anymore. But let me finish by saying this, the mom, she was really sweet and her boys were good kids. None of them deserved it, and I hope that guy rots in hell. So I was about 16 years old and at that time very interested in ghosts, paranormal things and stuff like that. My mom is, I wouldn't say, a medium or anything, but highly esoteric and can see things in and around other humans. For example, she can feel bad energies and also describe dead loved ones of her customers standing beside her perfectly. And if you want to hear stories of my mom, just let me know. But her being so sensitive of those things did wake my interest even more. So I went online and researched on ways to communicate with spirits and energies and whatnot, and found out a way to do so. I invited my sister and 2 of our neighbors, kids, to help and watch. I didn't want to do that alone because of obvious reasons, but waited for my mother to leave because she prohibited specifically to never communicate with the other world. But we wrote letters and numbers and also yes and no on a paper, cropped them out and arranged them in a circle. But we basically crafted a wire board. We lowered the shutters in my room, yes. We did that in my room. Stupid. I know, and lit candles and placed them in different places in my room. Me and my sister placed our hands on an upside-down drinking glass and the neighbor's kids watched from the bed the first few times. They laughed and chuckled when we said phrases like, "Is someone here who wants to talk with us?" Or "If you want to communicate, please do that." But after a few minutes a few of the candles started to flicker. I didn't think too much about it, because I mean candles do flicker. But after some more time some of them really started to freak me out. They started to look like someone trying to blow them out. In fact, you know, like when you want to blow out candles but don't use enough air, so you just blow the flame in one direction. They looked a lot like that, and then the glass started moving. I looked at my sister and she looked at me simultaneously asking if the other one was pushing it. We both got really freaked out, so we took our hands off of the glass and that freaking thing moved all by itself. I got a panic attack and we all screamed and ran to my door to get out, but we had actually closed it before we got. In hindsight it was a very stupid idea, but I pressed the hand of my door down, but it just didn't move not an inch. My sister and the neighbor kid started to help, pressing it down, and we leaned on it with all of our body weight all combined, but it just didn't move an inch. And then the candle started to go out and we just screamed and screamed. And eventually it opened and we ran into the kitchen in a corner and we just huddled together and cried. After that, we eventually calmed down and things kind of went back to norm. From that day on, I never slept well in that room too, because I just felt watched all the time, and my writing desk chair started moving on its own as well. I placed it under the desk, and the next morning it stood a good meter away from it. My mom also noticed that my room just didn't feel right, like something lurks inside of it, and asked me if I did something stupid. Eventually, I told her, and she was furious, saying that I could have brought much more evil in our apartment than a spirit that amuses itself by disturbing us. She said a ritual in my room, saying a few phrases and putting a protective circle around it and smoking it out with sage and whatnot. And after that, I was never disturbed by it again. Nevertheless, though, I won't be doing that again. I was in the kitchen the night before last, washing up some plates from dinner, when I glanced out the window in front of the sink, and I saw someone standing at the far end of my yard. From what I could tell, it looked like a man of average build with a scruffy appearance. It was essentially behind my neighbor's toolshed, which is right on the border of my property, and so I thought that he might be somebody that they knew. It was dark, though, and he was quite a distance away, so I couldn't really see what he was doing. His back was mostly turned to me as well, but by his movement it looked like he was patting the ground with the shovel, as if he just buried something and was covering it up with dirt. This definitely raised my suspicions a bit, and so I called my neighbors to ask if they were aware that there was someone behind their shed. They said that there were not, and the husband went outside to investigate. I saw my neighbor open his door, and the man saw or heard it and bolted off into the woods. I went outside to meet my neighbor and see if there was evidence of what the man had been doing. So we both arrive at the same spot, and I tell the neighbor that the man fled, and the neighbor says that he saw him running away. We look down at the ground, and there is indeed fresh dirt where someone was digging. A neighbor gets the shovel which the man dropped when he ran off and starts digging it back up nervously, because we were both expecting something gruesome. No doubt, however, what we dug up has left us with more questions than answers. It was a plastic bag with something softball-sized and heavy inside. We dump out the contents, and it's a rock painted red and a small smiley face, but not at the kind you pin on your shirt. And why would somebody be out trespassing on someone's property in order to bury a painted rock in a button? And yes, it's definitely paint on the rock, not blood. It's not a murder weapon, as far as we can tell, but still the neighbors and I reported it. So local law enforcement, and they came and they took a statement. They took the rock and the button too, just in case it turns out to be connected with the crime. The whole ordeal has me a bit on edge, to be honest, but why else would someone bury something like that in the dark? The police combed the woods last night too, and they did come across something which makes this whole thing even more unnerving. They found a spot about a mile behind our homes, in the woods, where it appears that someone may have been living. I live in a pretty small town in a more rural area, and a lot of people here hunt deer and turkeys and the like. The spot that they discovered apparently had been an old lean-to type shelter that had been used at one point for hunting, but probably had been abandoned for a while when whoever found it and decided to live there. In the spot there were some old blankets recently used, fire pits someone had made, and a few other things like food and wrappers and plastic plates in a small cooking pot. There was also something, though, that freaked my neighbor and I out quite a bit. The guy had a portable kerosene heater unit, and it was the exact portable kerosene heater that went missing from my neighbor's shed almost a year ago. So at this point we believe this guy has been living there for quite some time. However, no one in the area has reported to have seen anyone like him around or had any other incidences so far. The police are still in the process of talking to the other neighbors in the area. It does appear that he's left the spot at this point, but there's no being certain that he won't return. In the meantime, I'm staying at my sister's in a neighboring town, and my neighbors are staying with their adult children. My neighbor and I are going with the police escort back to our homes to set up security cameras and the like later today as well. I really don't want to go anywhere near there tonight. But it might be the only hope that we have of catching this guy and putting everyone's minds at ease. The police are taking this matter pretty seriously as well, because many years ago we had a case of a homeless man in the woods who attempted to abduct a young woman. So between that and being a small town, this sort of thing really rattles us a lot. They're trying to track down the film used for the camera or where it came from, rather, but they suspect that it may be an older camera in film, and if the man was homeless, it's likely that he just found it. As for the cause of death for the kitten that they found, they're running tests as we speak, but the vet's initial thought is that it looks like it wasn't. This doesn't necessarily mean that it was killed intentionally. It could have just accidentally eaten something that set out as bait for rodents and whatnot, and the man could have just found it that way. Who knows? But it definitely hadn't been dead long when the man had it, because rigor mortis had not yet set in at the time. Meanwhile, too, the whole neighborhood is aware and have been alerted by authorities to be wary and keep their eyes peeled for anything or anyone suspicious. The police do believe that they may actually have a lead as well. Fitting the general description of our guy is actually pretty familiar to the local gas station convenience store clerk. And as soon as the clerk heard about the incidences, he called the police to tell them about the guy. I also paid the clerk a visit this afternoon on my way back to my sister's house after installing cameras in my neighbors and my own residence, and I spoke with him personally. It seems the men would often come into the store to use their can and bottle return, and the clerk believed that's how the guy was making his living, by picking up bottles and cans out of people's trash and recycling and then returning them for change. The clerk says that the man told him his name was Robert and went by the nickname Robbie. The clerk believes that Robbie does have mental health problems. By the way, that he acts in some of the things that he says as well. It appears he suffers from paranoid delusions. Maybe the clerk said that usually he only ever spoke in short sentences when spoken to and never made EYC contact. However, the clerk overheard the man rambling and mumbling to himself while returning cans one day, repeating something over and over about cleaning the dirty water while the people keep bleeding. Aside from that rather highly unnerving detail, the clerk said that Robbie seemed pretty much harmless. But here's something that definitely puts a bit of a twist into the story and may put your minds a little at ease, though not much about what happened to the kitten. So the store clerk said that maybe 2 or 3 weeks prior to my initial encounter, the man Robbie had come to the store with some bags of cans and bottles. He also had a kitten with him. It fits the description of the one that we found. The kitten seemed healthy but a little too skinny, and the man said that he'd found it in the woods and thought that it was a stray. He asked the clerk to look after the kitten for a few minutes while he returned cans, and afterwards he purchased a small bag of dry cat food and a hot dog and cola for himself. With the change, the clerk says, the man seemed to really care for the kitten and even said he's my friend. And when the clerk asked him the cat's name, the man said that he was still thinking of one, but he thought that he might call him Frankie. But then he said something else that was definitely unnerving. Little babies like Frankie, like kittens, though it is possible that he meant that kittens are like little babies and not that babies like kittens. I don't know. It's worded creepily either way. So now the police and myself are thinking this quite probably is a homeless, mentally ill man and the kitten was in fact his pet. The tests have come back that the kitten had rat poison in his system. So we think someone in the area left rodent poison out in some food to bait raccoons. We have a serious raccoon problem here. They often get into the trash and make huge messes. The kitten probably wandered off in search of food and found the poison bait, ate it and died. Unfortunately, the man probably thought that it was me and or my neighbor who had poisoned the cat for whatever reason. Maybe the location he discovered it deceased was near us, or maybe he thought that it was on purpose because he had previously buried things in our yard, which we don't have any explanation for the first items yet. But I assure you that we're not the type of people to leave poison out for innocent animals to find. We have pets of our own, in fact. However, We know that a lot of people do bait and poison the raccoons here. Either way, I think it's possible. This guy might not have been doing anything truly malicious the first time when he buried the rock in the pin. But the second time it's possible that he was angry and did mean to threaten us because he thinks that we killed his only friend and beloved pet. But that's just speculation and nothing is set in stone at this time. I'll close by saying this, though, even though this is still a very serious, frightening situation, and he is still considered highly dangerous, mostly to myself and my neighbors, because he may try to do more to take revenge for what he thinks that we did. I'm also incredibly heartbroken for this man, if that indeed was his pet kitten. I honestly cannot blame him for his actions if he truly is mentally ill and mostly harmless as well. If that is indeed the case as well, I do hope that they find him and get him somewhere where he can get some help. Police are still questioning local shop owners and other citizens in the area for further information. They're also searching missing persons databases to see if anyone has reported anyone fitting Robbie's description as missing within recent years, to see if they can identify him and figure out possible current whereabouts. Until then, I'll continue to stay with my sister and my neighbors with their family for as long as I can, just to be out of harm's way. The newly installed security cameras have night vision and motion sensors as well, and they're active in recording, and so I'll keep you guys posted. So I was very young when this happened, maybe 3 or 4 years old. So I'm guessing around 97 or 98. I know your mind can impel false memories, so I don't know if it actually happened or not, but I do remember it pretty vividly. So we were living in Germany, and I shared a room with my brother, who's 3 years older than I am. The head of my bed was right below the only window in the room, and one night, he jumped out of his bed and ran across the room to where I was to look out the window. And this is where things seemed weird, because it was like he knew that something was out there, and he needed to see it. But there was no way that he could have seen or heard anything down there at all. I got up to see what the fuss was about, and down on the street below was a man stood completely still facing the road, which stretched away from where we were. He was tall and broad, and he wore a suit, a long brown overcoat and the fedora-type hat, which made him look like someone from the 50s. But he also had no head. His hat just seemed to float. He turned and walked away from us down the street about 20 yards, stopped and turned to face the road again. 20 seconds later, he walks another 20 yards, and once again he stops and turns to the road. He did this 4 or 5 times over before he disappeared into the darkness as well. He never turned in our direction or in any other apart from straight down the street into the road. There were no cars or other people coming down the street when he was on it, and the atmosphere around him just seemed ghostly still, if that's the right way you say it. But the fact that my brother seemed to know that he was there is what wears me out the most, as much as the fact that he seemed to have no head. Weirdly too, I don't remember feeling scared or intimidated. I felt more excited to see this headless man. It's one of the earliest memories that I have, and it's stuck with me ever since as well. I've never spoken to my brother about this, nor have I told anyone. But I'm wondering, is anyone else had a similar experience? Or could this just all be in my head? I'm skeptical for the most part about the paranormal, so I just really don't know what to make of it. So this story and the background surrounding it is going to sound mildly insane, to put it simply, but I ask that you please try to keep an open mind. Growing up, I've always been more spiritually in tune than what could be perceived as normal. As I've gotten older, that hasn't really changed. I can go into so many stories about this too, such as dreams that have come true, or cases of sleep paralysis in which I've seen and felt things, an encounter with what I believe to be a demon, and so on and so forth. But for this, I'm going to start off with my earliest and most prominent memory of living in a haunted house for 1.5 years. If anyone's interested, I'll tell my other stories too, but for now, to the haunted house. So I was 12 at the time. My family had moved into a house built in the 1930s, set up in a neighborhood of matching and eagerly old houses in a long straight street, It was a fairly dark neighborhood with tall trees and, truth be told, it was almost a cliché horror setting. But being a sheltered Catholic girl, I didn't think anything of it. I was excited to live in this new house and make new friends. And the first day in the house was relatively normal. The movers would arrive the next day with all of our respective furniture. So for that day we had mattresses, some plates, utensils and food, and I wasn't really bothered by the house at first. Or maybe I was just blinded by my excitement to really notice things. I don't know, but this all changed. When night came, I went to my empty room, where my mattress was, as well as a few personal items laid out, and started to make my bed. The layout of the room was fairly simple. My bed is in the right-hand corner of the room, with the doorway right across from it. My closet was on the wall that my bed was pressed to, so I could see its trim and outline from my bed, but not inside of it. If that makes sense. The closet also had a door, and for whatever reason, the closet bothered me even the first day. I can't really explain it, but I just didn't bother putting my clothes away, as I was too uncomfortable with it. But weirdly, I also couldn't shut the closet door. I just didn't want to go near it, even if it meant giving myself comfort by not having it open. Like I said, I just can't explain it, and it gave me bad vibes. But being 12, I just kind of shrugged it off as standard EXAZI. Yeah, oh my goodness. Closets are scary. Monsters are under the bed, sort of stuff. I figured the fear would just go away eventually. When bedtime neared, though, I realized that I had no lamps in my room, with the only light being from the overhead fan. The thought of being in the room in total darkness definitely left me with a bad and terrible feeling. So I decided that I would sleep with my bed door open and the hallway light on as well. I didn't want my parents to assume that I was being babyish, so I just justified it in case I woke up and needed to go to the bathroom, get water, etc. I didn't know the layout of the house and I didn't want to fumble in the darkness to turn my light switch on. My parents understood so great at the time. I had a golden retriever who was the light of my life. She was my childhood dog who always slept in my room, usually on my floor bed, and when I was ready for bed I took a treat and I brought her in with me. I tried to bring her to my mattress with me, encouraging her with words and food, but as soon as she entered my room, she just whirled around and left. I tried to bring her in my room with me several times, but always did the same result. My mom said that the dog was probably just anxious due to the move, and in the end I accepted that. So I just tried to sleep alone that night, but I couldn't sleep, though I laid in my bed, bundled in my blankets. Coming from a conservative Catholic family, my brain never once jumped to the idea of ghosts or spooky things. I had no idea what I was feeling, but one thing was just crystal clear, though I was alone. I truly didn't feel like I was. I glanced periodically towards my closet, noting how it felt as if something was peering around the corner at me. I didn't see anything, but it felt as if something was there and watching me. I could only stare back before trying to fall asleep and sleep. Sleeping in that room was just impossible. After we received our furniture, though, I immediately set up my lamp on my desk on the end of the room. That's I would use as a nightlight. I refused to sleep in my room in darkness. There am I, though, that I had outgrown, sleeping with a nightlight by sick. So being 12 years old and insisting my light be on for me to sleep warranted eye rolls from my parents. They thought that I was being ridiculous, especially since I had no explanation as to why. How could I explain what I was feeling? I couldn't, because I didn't even understand it. But in the end they didn't argue with me, and they just let me do it by night. I turned my lamp on, burrow myself into my blanket, and just try to ignore the terrible feeling of something watching me. I didn't put any clothes in my closet and I kept it in my dresser, even if it didn't make sense for dresses, jackets, and so on. I put a Harry Potter poster on the door to make it friendlier, as if a protective barrier to provide comfort. And I remember one night I was laying on my side just staring at the wall. I was curled up and bundled in my blankets in my safe burrito form, only my face peeing out so that I could breathe, and for whatever reason, something compelled me to look up. So I did, and in a slow, almost leisurely movement, I saw the shadow of what looked to be a person move across the wall. I didn't process it fully at the time. I tried to justify it in the moment as being the fan shadow, but as an adult I look back and I honestly shudder, recalling the distinct features of a nose, a chin, and even a hunched back. Another night cold in my bed, I felt that I saw movement at the end of it, a shadow really ducking downwards, and I don't know what compelled me to do this. Honestly, maybe 12-year-old me was brave or an idiot. But I pulled myself out of my burrito form and moved across my bed to peer down at the end of it, as if I would see someone hunched there, or my dog or anything. When I did, I saw nothing, of course, but the shadow was just so distinct and so dark, and I knew something had to have been there. I crawled back into my blankets and I tried to sleep. One other night, though this time not in my room, I went to my parents' bedroom to retrieve some cough medicine from their cabinets, when I heard something so distinct that it gave me pause. There was a tap from inside the walls, and this took me off guard, so I turned to look at the wall where it was coming from. Quiet and slow at first, but gradually began to build in sound. This may sound ridiculous, but I'm willing to put my hand on a Bible and swear on my soul. But I swear to you that I saw the walls move as if something was pressing against. It slithered up the wall and into the ceiling, as if trying to break out, and as if the wall were made of softest substance. I began to sob and I ran downstairs. My dad was away on a business trip and my mom was asleep on the couch. She had taken some medication because we were both sick, so she was passed out cold. I tried to shake her awake, begging her to wake up, telling her that I believed someone was upstairs, but she just wouldn't budge. I ran upstairs back to her room and the horror persisted. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I ran into my parents' bed, burrowed under the covers, and I could have run. But being in my room was no comfort and I was afraid of every other room in the house. So I stayed under the covers until the tapping stopped, and then I dragged my dog into the room with me and shut the door. And that night she just cried and whined the whole night, sometimes pouring at my door. But I was too afraid of being alone and I cried myself to sleep. That night something lived in that house, and I don't know what it was or if there was more than one thing. But when I reflect on living in that place, I also reflect on how every night was just a hellish nightmare, and how every sleepover at a friend's house away from it was a breath of fresh air. Moving from that house gave me great relief, but we moved into a new home for a while. That was beautiful and bright, and I slept like I'd never slept before that first night, safely and with relief. And my dog even slept in my room with me willingly that night too. But that old house, I'll never, ever forget it and its other occupants. To preface this, I'm a 30-year-old wife, mother and Marine Corps veteran. I practice and help instruct out doing KRA, and honestly never in a million years did I expect something like this would ever happen to me. But last night it did, and I hope that this is the right place to get this off my chest. So last night I went to Walmart's to do some grocery shopping. On my way into the store, I noticed a shady looking beat-up gray sedan circling around the parking lot and not parking. I found it odd, but rushed it off and went into the store. After I finished shopping, I came out of the store and noticed the same car still circling. It was odd for sure, but not enough to make me put up my guard or anything. I unloaded my groceries in the car, took the cart back to the cart corral, and when I entered my car, I got a really strong urge to immediately lock my doors, even before I started my car, and almost instantly after I did this, That same sit-in whipped up partially, blocked me in, so that the only way that I could get out was to reverse. And it was a middle-aged man, and his window was rolled down and he was yelling at me. What made me nervous, though, was that both of his hands were in his pockets. I couldn't be sure if he was just weird and cold or if maybe he had something in those pockets. So I didn't want to take my eyes off of his hands, which made it hard for me to back up. So I rolled down my window an inch and asked him what he needed. Stupid, I know, but he said that he needed help and that he couldn't hear me. Well, so could I open my door? I asked him what he needed help with, and he started yelling at me to open my effing door. At that point, I'd put my car in reverse and chanced to glance at my backup camera, during which time he had gotten out of his car and was now at my door trying to yank at the handle, still yelling at me to open my door. I tore out of there so fast that I'm surprised I wasn't actually stopped by the cops. I found a crowded, well-lit parking lot and instantly called the police, who thankfully took me seriously and went to take a look. But by that time the man was long gone. I know nothing happened and perhaps I shouldn't still be shaken up over it, but that encounter just really shook me and I just wanted to share this. So thanks for listening. So before I get into this story, I know the generic answer to these stories is sleep paralysis, and although I do have value, sometimes this is definitely different. So when I'm on my way to sleep and I finally find a comfortable position to lay, I usually can only sleep if I'm back towards the middle of the bed. This thing will come up and I can feel my bed react to something climbing onto it because it sinks down a bit. It then proceeds to just kind of lean over me and breathe as close to my face as possible. And I can literally feel it when I don't react to that. Open my eyes. For instance, I can feel it get off the bed from behind me and get back onto the other side so that we're face to face. I know this because I can feel the bed react again to it getting on the other side, and now feel the breathing right in front of my face instead of over me. Plus, when someone gets really close to your face and you can feel the heat coming off of their face, I can feel that too. And lastly, with still no reaction from me, it gets off the bed again. But I know it's still there just from that feeling that you get from someone staring at you. Now, like I said, I know that there's a lot of people who would think that, of course, this is just sleep paralysis. The whole story is pretty generic to exactly that for the most part. But this is why I don't think that's what it is. Because I can move. I'm not immobile and it doesn't feel like anything is holding me down. I know that I can move because I'm so used to sleep paralysis that I know how to check for it, as this is how I usually transition to a lucid dream. That's a whole different story. Also the way that I sleep. I have one hand under me, usually under my pillow, so I just open and close my hand a few times to confirm that I can actually move. This works for me in my head, because if there is something there, I can move a little without it knowing. I then move my legs up to get into a fetal position just to make sure that my feet are not hanging off the end of the bed. Too many stories regarding that. But now that I know that I can move, this is where I start to get nervous. Because now I have to actively try to keep my eyes closed, since I've confirmed that I'm actually awake and it seems to be right in front of my face. At this point, I can literally feel the sweat coming out of my pores and my entire upper body, because I'm just so nervous. What I've done the last few times, when I know it's not on the bed anymore and I'm drenched in sweat to the point that I need to move off of the sweat spot, I just say, screw it, and I jump up from the bed and yell as if that's going to do anything. But when I do, though, of course there's always nothing there. I'm 31 years old and this isn't new to me. I have a theory that it might be related to a lady that sometimes haunts my dreams, and since I was in that's another story for another time. Again, it also has crossed my mind that it could be my dad. That's actually worse than the first option to me. Again, another story for another time. But anyway, what do you guys think this is? And can you shed any light on the situation? It was an October night at about 9 p.m. and might had spent a long day, working as a hostess at a restaurant. One of my friends had asked me to help them out with getting a lot of liquor for a party that was being thrown, because I didn't really have time to get it all. In one shopping trip, I went to 3 different liquor stores in a matter of 3 days, one each day. I ended up spending $180 on the liquor altogether. They said that would pay me after I got it, because they had no idea how much all of it would cost, and that they would even add a tip, which I was fine with. At the first liquor store that I went to, I hopped the rest of the order to my car, and this liquor store is in a very suburban area. So I felt completely safe, and I've been there countless times. As I'm putting the liquor into my trunk of my used cop car, I see out of the corner of my eye 2 men looking around and walking towards me. I act like I don't see them and mind my business, but keep my peripheral gaze on them because I never fully let my guard down. "Hey, could you give me a ride home?" one of the men asked, in a black hoodie. I said I'm actually very busy tonight, and I have stuff that I got to do when I get home, trying to be as nice as I can. I add, "Oh, that's vintage. There's a light rail just over there, though, and it's also where buses circulate." He came back at me with, "Well, I don't really know where I'm going." So I told him, yeah, there's some maps over there by the light rail to show you what path. He just looks at me with his friend, and then they pull out bandanas over their faces, only revealing their eyes, and he pulls up his shirt, which reveals a gun in his waistband. I'm so stunned that I can't respond. All that's going through my head is, oh my goodness, my parents are going to kill me for getting this car stolen eventually. His friend says, "I don't think she thinks we're serious men, but put the gun to her head." He put the gun to my head, and this wave of shock hit my body, and it just doesn't feel real. A couple of seconds pass and my brain sort of starts functioning again, and I hand over my keys as they're trying to figure out how to get into my car. I just kind of stand there, frozen, not comprehend that my car is being stolen by these men for 10 seconds. You take a good 30 seconds to figure out how to turn the car on and learn the controls. And while that's happening, I'm just standing still as a rock because I'm thinking that they're about to shoot me if I started to run. But then my mind tells me to run because they could take me with them and hold me hostage. Or God knows what. I was holding my purse, which had my whole life in it, and I know it wasn't a good idea to do this, but it was so convenient. It had all my medications, money, and everyday things that I need. While I'm doing stuff, I was trying my best to keep it out of sight, in the back of me. All of the thoughts are rushing through my head for the next 20 seconds when, all of a sudden, another man runs out of the store as the car is driving away, and he hops into the back of it. While I watch them drive away quickly, I slowly walk towards the liquor store, and as soon as they're out of my sight, I start running to tell the liquor store employees about the incident. While my body was shaking, I told the store manager to lock the door. My car was just stolen at gunpoint. This man then has the audacity to ask me, "What if we have customers?" The employee, freaking out, runs towards the door to lock it, yelling, "Oh my goodness, what, this never happens here. This is crazy." But what happened exactly? I tried to tell her why my body was shaking. My voice was shaking, and I start tearing up because of the shock as I'm telling her this. She picks up the phone and she tells me to call the police right away. The police come in less than a minute, and I give them my statement. The man that I told the story to says, yeah, this sort of thing happens a lot, unfortunately, and it's very rare that we find whoever's done. It's hard to determine what will happen to your car as well. We'll just have to wait and see, which makes me feel so much better about everything. I tried calling my mom, father, and brother. No one picked up. As I cried, I laughed a little bit because, of course, this type of thing would only happen to me. Although he had work early in the morning. I called my boyfriend because I didn't want to ride home in a police car. I needed to be with someone that I knew and could talk to about this with. When he picked up, he'd been asleep and got annoyed with me at first. But then I explained the gist of what had happened, so I'd be able to explain it more in depth in person. In the end, he didn't actually come in time, so I got driven home by the cops and he met me at my house. Shortly after we got to my house, my parents got home and were in shock hearing about what had happened. We all sat around and talked about it until my boyfriend had to go home to a proper amount of sleep the next day. I decided that I had to drop my class, that I wasn't doing well and to begin with, because there was no way that I was bouncing back after that. I just needed time to recuperate. I told my friend about all the liquor that was stolen, and by that I mean all 18 worth of liquor was stolen, and they told me that they felt so bad that they put me through that, and I just told them, look, but I just spent 180 of my own money for you guys, and as long as you pay me back for it, I'll be fine. There was a good amount of people that were chipping into this party, and some of them didn't even want to give me money, because they believed it wasn't their fault that I was dumb enough to get my car stolen. So why even give me money for liquor that I didn't have? Eventually, they scraped out the money, though, and they paid me back a couple of days later. 5 days later, they found my car ditched on the side of the road in the city. I had my car thoroughly cleaned after the incident, and I picked it up. And when I got my car back, I realized pretty quickly that these men had stolen everything. Even my expensive textbooks that I'd left in my car for school, that I was going to return. I pushed down all my emotions for so long that a week later I kind of had emotional breakdown, and I still am not the same after this whole event. So this may not be that bad compared to many others, but a man has followed me around the store 5 times now, and for background I can only really go to the store late at night around 9 or 10 due to my job. I know it isn't safe, but I always carry a taser or pepper spray on me for things just like this. I'm also only 5 FD tall and pretty petite. He's probably at least 6 FD all and over double my size, so it started sometime last year. A man walked up to me while I was in self-checkout, started asking me typical questions like asking if I had a boyfriend, telling me that he noticed me walking around, that he needed to tell me that I was pretty. Things like that. My lead didn't said that I had a boyfriend just for my own safety and took the compliment. And I didn't think anything weird of it until it happened again and again. Every time he used the exact same script in the exact same order, and always finds me in a very closed-off space. The first 3 times he never even had anything in his hands to buy. The second time that I was sitting on the floor of the makeup, totally vulnerable. He said the same thing as the first time, and I politely told him that I still do have a boyfriend, but thank you, and that was that I just thought of it as kind of coincidence. The third time it happened, though, I was in the very corner of the store by the vegetables, with nobody near me. He says the exact same thing as the first 2 times, so I finally had to tell him, you've come up to me 3 times now. Every single time you've talked to me, I've told you, no, I need you to leave me alone. Do not come up to me again. The 4th time it happened, we passed each other and he realized it was me. So he circled around and followed me into the medicine aisle and pretended to look at the balls. Every time I took a step to the side, he would too, and at that point, as soon as I saw him, I called up a friend, so I would have somebody that could hear what was happening and try to scare him off. I turned the corner and I could hear him calling out for me, so I started walking faster. Believe it or not, I ended up running into a police officer in uniform, and even though he was busy and I felt bad for interrupting, I asked him for help. The officer walked me to the self-checkout. When the man actually had the nerve to pick the counter right next to me, the officer walked me out to my car, and I could see the guy was watching me in the parking lot. But the last interaction happened just a couple of minutes ago, so I was looking for something for dinner and walked out of the frozen food across to the makeup. And guess who walked past me at the same time? We crossed paths and I kept walking and checking over my shoulder. He was still watching me, and I freaked out a bit and I hid in the makeup aisle. Then perked my head out, and sure enough, he was looking up and down the aisles to see where I went. I texted my mom and a friend because I didn't know what to do. But when I saw him turn, I went to find him and manager. But I could hear his keys following behind me. The manager walked me to the checkout, and once again he picked the counter next to mine. The manager walked me out, and he trailed behind me and again watched me get into my car. I did a couple of circles to make sure nobody was following me and drove home. But I've got to ask you guys, am I being stupid and just overreacting? It's happened 5 times now, and after the 3rd time it happened, I reported him to a different manager, and he told me that if he's ever in the store again, he'll be removed and banned. But that particular manager wasn't there tonight. So where do I go from here? The officer that helped me even told me that unfortunately, he couldn't do more than just walk me out. I know I shouldn't go so late, but it's the only time that I can, so I don't know what to do. So this is a bit of a weird one. Years ago, I worked in a supermarket in a small town. It was a pretty hellish place to work. So many of the employees banded together and were really friendly with each other. One of my coworkers, Ben, wasn't the kind of guy that I would usually be friends with, but he was pretty funny, in a kind of quirky, offbeat kind of way, and he helped make the day go faster. So it was good. He and I were still friendly with each other, and when I left for an office job, he hugged by on my last day good too. Several years later, one of mine and Ben's mutual friends posted an article on Facebook and said, "I can't believe I used to be friends with this piece of." I read the article and my stomach just turned cold. It was a news story about how Ben had gone to prison for aggressively murdering his infant son and then tried to cover up what he had done. I was pretty disturbed and couldn't believe that I'd once been friendly with someone who could do such a thing. Even more years passed and I moved to a different county and a different job. I now work in an office that has a warehouse attached. I work in the office, but the warehouse has a really high turnover. People leave or are fired, get hired all the time, and one day I hear the office door open and the guy says that he's come to start working in the warehouse. It's the first day and I look over my shoulder. To my horror, I realize this guy could be Ben. He looks older and rougher than the last time that I saw him, but it could definitely be him. I asked for the new guy's name, and yet, it's Ben. I didn't want to spread gossip or start a panic or anything, but I felt that I had to say something. Many of the office employees bring their children to work some days, and even though I doubt Ben is now in the business of just killing random children, how do I know what he is or isn't capable of? I spoke to the warehouse manager, who was horrified to learn the truth. I showed him the article about what Ben had done, and the warehouse manager told me that Ben had lied in his application and said that he had no criminal convictions. He was fired immediately and was escorted out of the office. This is a bit of a long one, but bear with me so. My M's always had spirits or haunts in her life, but most of them bad as well. They seemed to follow her right from childhood in every house that she lived in, and this is just one of those stories. But there are many more. My M and I were out shopping one day, and we ended up at a local thrift store. They had this deal where they showcased upcoming items behind glass, and if you like something, you had to come back for it the day that it would be going on sale. This was a big attraction because, well, of course they showcased the best items that they could do in on the sale day. People were lined up at the door to be the first one to buy a covered item. So we were looking at the items on display, and my mom pointed out a porcelain doll, a clown. I looked at it and immediately my whole body shuddered and became goosensed. I've always had a bit of a sixth sense for these things, and this clown gave me a huge case of the willies. I told her it wasn't a good clown. My mom was completely enamored with it, though I warned her that I got a bad feeling from it, and please don't buy it. But 2 weeks later, I went to her house and I ended up on her back deck, and sitting in one of those dead chairs was a damn clown. I went inside and said, "Mom, how could you? I told you that thing gave me the creeps." She told me that she was drawn to it. So the day it went on sale, she headed up to the store early and stood in line, and no one else seemed interested in it. So she took it as a sign that she was meant to have it. I asked her why it was sitting outside, and she said that my nephew Jay was seriously weirded out by it and begged her to get rid of it. Thank you so much for joining me in the world of midnight dark stories. I hope these tales have sent shivers down your spine and sparked your imagination. Remember to subscribe, like, and share your scariest thoughts in the comments. Until the next time we meet in the darkness, keep the thrill alive.